Welcome to Myanmar Musings, a podcast of the Myanmar Research Centre at the Australian National University in Canberra. My name is Luke Corbin. It's the 11th of August, and today we're bringing you a seminar from the Myanmar Update 2021 conference held in Canberra last month. Today's seminar is by Dr. Tomas Martin, and it is titled Exploring Myanmar Prison Departments' Responses to COVID-19 and Implications of the Coup. Thomas is presenting on behalf of other anonymous researchers, and he's being introduced to you by Dr. Sverre Molland, who's an anthropologist at the ANU. This was a really great talk, and we all hope that you enjoy it. Thomas answers one question after he wraps up. So over to Sverre.
My name is Sverre Molland. Good luck trying to pronounce that correctly. You can call me whatever you would like. I'm one of the anthropologists here at the ANU. I'm a migration and development studies scholar focusing on the Mekong region. We have a very exciting paper presented by Tomas Martin on behalf of anonymous colleagues in Myanmar, which will deal with the very interesting but somewhat grim topic of prisons. The floor is yours, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Sverre. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, loud and clear.
As mentioned by Sverre, this paper is presented on behalf of researcher colleagues from Myanmar who remain anonymous. We have worked together on ethnographic prison research for some years, and they look forward to present their paper today. But because of persecution of critical thinking in Myanmar, my colleagues would face risks by publicly presenting their work. So I'll therefore relay their key points to honor their important work. But this paper is presented by me, and I take full responsibility for it. Since the military coup, the State Administration Council has arrested and detained thousands of people, continuing a deep tradition of political imprisonment, torture, and inhumane treatment. But even before the coup, Myanmar prisons were characterized by deplorable conditions, climates of fear, and harsh discipline. Since the pandemic, the prison system has been struggling to respond adequately to COVID-19 with various restrictions, pardons, ad hoc trainings, and piecemeal protection efforts. This paper explores Myanmar Prison Department MPD's responses to COVID-19, including consideration of how the coup is making already difficult matters worse. Contextualized by field research on family visits, gender, and prison governance, and accounts of recently released detainees, this paper raises questions about the way the pandemic and the coup is affecting prison life and reflects on the enhanced vulnerabilities of detainees in post-coup Myanmar. In conclusion, I draw attention to a theoretical point about crisis, be it COVID or coup, as something which is not exceptional, but rather a condition for everyday prison life, that is, to analytically approach crisis as context. But I want to start off with describing an image. Everyone here has been affected by horrific photos from Myanmar, but one photo stood out for me. It's a photo of a young man, an activist from Changyu, who was arrested and detained 8th June, sitting with his hands tied behind his back. One sees the uniformed arm of a soldier next to him, who seems to pull his head back for the camera. His face is bruised but expressionless, his t-shirt torn. Yet something else stands out as particularly absurd and distressing. His captors have blindfolded him with a soiled disposable face mask, which pragmatically is lifted off his mouth to cover his eyes. I don't know why this is done, but it symbolizes in a basic and brute way how detention and COVID collide in Myanmar right now, as coercion menacingly trumps care. The COVID pandemic has infected more than 170 million people and caused about 3.17 million deaths worldwide. The first case of COVID-19 was detected on 23rd March 2020 in Myanmar, and as of now, more than 150,000 people have been affected. After a 4-month gap in which the military tried to regain control of Myanmar, the junta started reporting numbers of COVID-19 infection and death at the beginning of June. Now, after a month of continued arrest and assault on civilians, the infection rate is reportedly 5,000 a day, and the number of deaths is already over 4,000. On the 3rd of June, Dr. Kin Ji said that the cluster of COVID cases in Tamil Township started with infections of 3 prison inmates. This corresponds to experts and international agencies who have drawn attention to the particular vulnerability of prisoners during the COVID-19 pandemic. Prisoners are very often suffering from underlying medical problems that increase their risk of getting infected, which are further aggravated by stigma, substandard conditions, overcrowding, and prioritization of security over care. Prisons risk becoming incubators of infectious diseases, which put detainees, staff, and their families at direct risk and may impact negatively on society as a whole. Many prison services across the world have tried to respond to these threats, including MPD. In Myanmar prisons, one of the first responses was to restrict and stop family visits. But the most prominent initiative, though not officially related to the pandemic, was undoubtedly the pardons. A little less than 25,000 prisoners, around a quarter of the whole population of prisoners in Myanmar, were released on 17th April 2020 by the civilian government. Yet the criteria for these releases were not announced or explained. This lack of information about prison policy is symptomatic and caused massive unrest among prisoners in 2019, who complained that pardons were arbitrary and not according to the rule of law. Our own research indicates that prison superintendents may use their power to recommend pardons to reward prisoners who are close to staff. International human rights and health services strongly recommend release mechanisms as a key measure to protect prisoners against COVID-19, with a special focus on the most vulnerable, the elderly, and the sick. Easing the burden of overcrowding in Myanmar prisons is of course commendable, but the opportunity to implement pardons transparently and with a view to enhance the protection of the most vulnerable prisoners were lost again. Moreover, to repeatedly address pressing penal problems by expelling prisoners en masse, and maintains a criminal justice system that imprisons many arbitrarily. The COVID-19 response is no exception. Harsh legal actions was quickly taken against people who did not obey emergency regulations, which in a matter of few months led to the prosecution of over 8,000 people. So these harsh criminal charges and ensuing imprisonment undermine the short-term benefits of the pardons. Moreover, the pardons do not enhance the capacities of the prison service to deal with health risks. The prisons still do not have adequate facilities for social distancing, and prisons continue to be ill-equipped to address the pressing needs, illustrated, for instance, by the fact that only 30 doctors and about 80 nurses have to care for the entire prison population in Myanmar. Many prison services across the world quickly rushed to restrict or reduce family visits, also in Myanmar. Our research on prisoners' contact with the outside world shows the enormous importance of family visits to prisoners' welfare and mental and physical health. Family visits provide vital foodstuff, medicines, and money, which are crucial for prisoners' survival. As we have argued, the ban on visits was therefore very likely to have severe impact. Family visits are also crucial for prisoners' emotional well-being. It is a clear recommendation from all international agencies that the protective restrictions on visits should be minimal and that alternative measures should be ensured. Prison services are often over-focused on restricting outside contact due to outdated and out of proportion security concerns. In Myanmar, the total ban on telephone contact could, for instance, have been lifted, but this opportunity was also neglected. Inmates in all countries are typically among the least prioritized citizens in terms of access to healthcare. In international guidance documents, and prison experts are warning that the pandemic can turn into a death sentence for prisoners who are caught up in prison systems that do not take mitigation and protection very seriously. When the first COVID patients were detected, the government of Myanmar instigated lockdown restrictions, but such measures are not easily followed in prisons. The head of Minjan prison told Frontier in March 2020 that, I'm quoting, "The prison only has one doctor who will decide whether a patient has symptoms similar to COVID-19. Some prisons in remote areas do not even have health staff, resulting in abysmal conditions." Female former prisoners also report unavailability of health professionals, insufficient care, and inadequate responses to health emergencies. And this list of health challenges corresponds to our findings of ongoing research on gender and imprisonment in Myanmar. These challenges include preventive health, such as monitoring, medical checkups, and health educations, which are particularly important in the face of this virus. The MPD announced on March 2020 that prisons had been provided with personal care items and other health supplies, and that inmates had been educated about the virus in cooperation with the health department. Yet released prisoners argued otherwise. I'm quoting here. "When I was in prison, they did nothing at all a former prisoner told Irrawaddy News in February 2020. My family members brought me masks by the prison officials when I was in prison, but I didn't get them. I asked the new prison warden what he would do to prevent the virus in prison, and he said nothing to me. In April 2020, MPD announced that 290 wash basins would be put up to improve hand washing for Myanmar's approximately 90,000 prisoners. UN agencies also supported the MPD through awareness-raising activities and distribution of masks and hand sanitizers, and newcomers were quarantined for 21 days at separate wards. In addition, the MPD's Facebook post showed personnel in protective gear spraying prison facilities with disinfectant. It also showed prison officers temperature testing their colleagues, prisoner visitors, and police officers coming from court. Moreover, the MPD also conducted a series of training workshops in prisons all over Myanmar. However, the mode and quality of the training were questionable, as health experts were not invited for the workshops, while prison staff acted as trainers themselves. News media also reported on the distribution of ginger tea to prisoners, apparently to boost their immune system. A prisoner from Insane told his family member that prison staff had told him to drink ginger juice to make him immune to COVID-19. Misinformation that are likely to create confusion among the prisoners. So, the government and the MPD took a number of steps to respond to the virus, such as restriction of visits, awareness raising, etc., which we highlighted last year, that these measures were welcome but inadequate and hampered by authoritarian impulses. The damaging war-on approach to deal with society's problems, the war on terror, the war on drugs, connects to the war on corona and plays power more firmly into the hands of authoritarian actors and short-term technical rationales of controlling the immediate threat. Yet COVID-19 also offers a strong rationale to address underlying problems and to enhance transparency, letting go of security obsessions, developing trust and constructive dialogues between authorities, civil societies, and concerned stakeholders instead of suspicion. We identified this potential last year. Since the coup, the war on corona has developed into an unfolding war on the people, and the little potential to deal adequately with the virus in Myanmar prisons is replaced by aggravation. The arrests of protesters have worsened overcrowding dramatically. According to AAPP, the number of political prisoners is estimated to be 6,762 as of writing this paper. According to an ex-prisoner who was released in May 2021, prisoners on criminal charges also continue to seep into Myanmar prisons. He told us here, prison is so fully packed. For example, I stayed in ward number 5 and there were 160 prisoners in it. Since I work outside, I know there are lots of people coming every day. I think there are 30 to 40 coming into prison every day from Monday to Friday. When people are arrested, they're taken to either police lockups or military camps for interrogation. COVID testing is only done at the gates of the prison, if at all. An ex-prisoner told us that his hometown used to be one of the strictest in compliance with COVID regulations. But since the coup, they did not even have conversations about COVID anymore. They only talked about their experiences of arrest and what the future might hold for them. More generally, the strikes of civil servants, including health workers and an unknown number of prison staff, have of course also undermined the limited response capacity in the country as a whole, including in prisons. As the traditions go, the SAC released about 23,000 prisoners from prison during this year's New Year's pardon, trying, we assume, to display sovereign might and mercy. In addition to the inherent problems mentioned above, this round of pardoning was met with deep public suspicion. As clearing space for dissident, while simultaneously coaching and coercing groups of newly released prisoners to create chaos in the streets and attack protesters. This was apparently the case in earlier uprising, but it has not, as far as I know, been confirmed yet. Our interlocutors also note how the everyday life with COVID in prisons entail many peculiar inconsistencies. One ex-prisoner said, if prisoners are seen not to wear masks, they will be beaten and tortured. That is the problem. So prisoners will have to look for used masks, which other fellow prisoners have thrown away. For them, this is gold. Some prisoners will wash these masks again and again. However, the burden of not having soap can be avoided because it cannot be checked, he continued. Whether or not the prisoners have washed their hands, it's not important in prison because the staff cannot check their hands. Even if the prisoners don't wash their hands, they can just lie. But some rules are, as per tradition, diligently observed, disregarding the health risks. One ex-prisoner told us how all prisoners have to recite the prison rules every day. Whenever we recite the rules, he said, we are not allowed to wear masks. We have to take them off. If our voices crack or are not fully audible, we will get trouble. So I want to conclude by highlighting a theoretical perspective on prison life in situations that are regarded as acute crisis. This perspective is developed by anthropologist Henrik Vig, who posits that scholars who seek to understand the lives of people who are structurally violated and marginalized may consider to analyze crisis not as an emergency, but as the context. Vig argues that for many poor and marginalized people, crisis is not a rupture from normal state of affairs characterized by balance and peace. Crisis is not episodic, it is rather endemic. Volatility and vulnerability dominate everyday life. Crisis is not something that you live through, but something that you live in. Crisis is a chronic condition. It is a context of social life and the norm. This is not to say that crisis is passively accepted as the norm. When crisis is context, people still reflect on their lives and pursue possibilities, but typically in pragmatic and provisional ways, and with a view to generate some order within perpetual disorder. Crisis as context, Vig argues, allows us to see how people struggle to find their bearings, gain a sense of control and balance, and navigate their life through difficult environments, revealing both the brutality of social forces and the resilience of social agents. I suggest that the prison in Myanmar is a context of enduring and perpetual crisis. It's both a principled crisis of legitimacy and dignity and a practical crisis of overcrowding and institutional failure. Scarcity, misinformation, and violence are part of prison life in Myanmar before, during, and after COVID-19 and the coup. I suggest that this crisis as context perspective is twofold. Firstly, we may better understand how COVID-19 and the unfolding coup are appropriated by prison actors in pragmatic and provisional ways, which resonate with their everyday practices of survival. This means that responses to both COVID and coup are likely to reinforce the roles, informal economies, and privilege systems around prisoner leaders, to depreciate equality and gender concerns, to reanimate the tenuous boundary making between prison and the outside world, to reactivate the fault lines between criminal and political prisoners, and to reshuffle the power balances between prison staff and military personnel, just to mention a few issues. Secondly, the idea that COVID and coup become dimensions of a deeper penal crisis is not an attempt to disregard the impact of these emergencies. It is rather to register, as Didier Fassin points out in the case of France, that the COVID crisis did not provoke the crisis in detention centers, but instead uncovered their appalling ordinary reality. The perspective on crisis as context enables us to pay analytical attention to the ordinary reality of imprisonment that the current crisis are folded into, and to not forget that the chronic crisis of imprisonment is likely to endure unless genuine reforms are put on future agendas. Thank you, and thank you on behalf of my colleagues in Myanmar, and thanks to them.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Mange tak. Bit of a Scandinavian insertion there. We're now moving to the Q&A session, and that is whether you will be able to say something about what we perhaps can learn about your really interesting research on prisons in terms of the parts of the society in Myanmar, especially this paradox that prison populations are by default locked down, as it were, and then of course lockdowns and kind of this very highly territorialized ways of governing people through COVID is something that is now being applied to populations other than prisons inmates, right? So I'm just opening those two broad questions there for some final reflection and comment, please.
Thank you very much. I think that we are, of course, experiencing confinement on many scales, and also with great intensity. It has spread into the everyday life of elites. But I think that especially in the Myanmar case, and what we also hear from different people who are now going into hiding, is that the experience of confinement is deep set and shared not only when you're in prison, but also when you are hiding and when you are locked down. I think for prison scholarship, one of the things that has been maybe particularly distressing is that these potential moments of solidarity and awareness that I'm also hinting at with this notion of prison as context, where you actually experience confinement or see confinement running amok in society, or where confinement seeps into new groups of people. We also see with political imprisonment, suddenly we see the children of the elite are being exposed to confinement and to the deprivations related to imprisonment. The problem is that a lot of this solidarity wears off very quickly, and in many ways it can for persons who want to draw attention to the plight of imprisonment, and it can be an opportunity lost. But I sense that in this case, when we are talking about Myanmar, there is again an opportunity to stick attention to what confinement entails, and to make sure that this is not forgotten when a new blueprint for Myanmar has to be rewritten. And what I may also point out is that confinement sticks in terms of it's a long-lasting experience also post-confinement. So the opportunity and capacity to deal with these experiences are also extremely important to invest in, as we have seen, for instance, that some civil society organizations are struggling to generate support networks, to document not just fallen heroes, but also heroes who come out of confinement, and the attention to these histories, I think, are crucial, especially in the situation to come.
Thank you very much. Please join me, everyone, both of those of you who are participating online, as well as those of you who are present here in the room. Please join me in thanking the panelists for some very engaging and exciting papers. Thank you.